Okay, so moving on, let's talk about equipment for a bit. So when I'm approaching a new client or a project as an LD, the first questions I ask, other than those budget questions, are what gear is available? Do I have that rental budget? Can we borrow equipment? And can I call in a favor? Right? So those last two things are things you kind of really have to think about before you start to do. So borrowing equipment is a whole can of worms that you rarely want to open. So for me, it's the questions where it comes up there is what happens if something breaks? What happens if this theater company has borrowed these 6 moving lights from the theater company down the street and something happens to them? Who's going to deal with that? That's going to cause strained relationships. It's going to cause all kinds of problems, not to mention financial problems. Okay. Rental companies are equipped to handle those things. They have insurance for that. They have people for that. But your community theater down the street letting you borrow those couple of lights doesn't necessarily. So I try to stay away from borrowing gear whenever possible. Within my friends, I'll let some people borrow some stuff control-wise here and there, but it's to a very limited group of people. Same thing as far as calling in a favor. So it's a similar process for me. I might really, really want a particular thing on a show that I'm doing, and I know that if I call XYZ rental company, I could probably get that for free or for very little bit of money. But I start to think to myself, do I want to call in that favor on this particular project? And there's not necessarily a right or wrong, here's when you should, here's when you shouldn't to that particular question, right? So part of that to me is like, have these people been treating me well? Like this company, is this process going well? Is this a show? Is everybody working together? Is this a happy environment? I'm going to be much more amicable and much more willing to like call in those favors and to get those things brought in than I would be if it was a terrible environment, right? Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So a question just came in. Do I find it to be a balancing act on how often you call in favors? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, what favors I call in very much depends on what it is I need, right? So I'm not going to ask, sometimes I'll ask a manufacturer for like, hey, I'm working on this show and they don't have a budget, but I really need this, right? And I'll give you an example. Like there was a Luster 2 follow spot on a show last year, right? So I had the show I was doing this really small black box space. I really wanted a follow spot and I really wanted it to be a Luster, and we had no more money to spend. So I called some friends at ETC and I was like, hey, can we make this happen? And they did. And I do the same thing in a lot of my educational stuff. So in the educational work that I do, I'm a little bit more open to going ahead and calling in those favors because I'm very upfront. I'm like, listen, this is for a school. What can you do to help me out here? Because a lot of the companies I'm working with get that. And they know that if they make an investment in that school, that several years down the road, it's going to pay off for them.